Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. It's Rivalry Week. I'm Bill Oram, joined as always by my rival, not quite, but like my rhetorical foil, Brenna Greene from Coin 6. Brenna, welcome into the studio. How are we today?
I am going to refer to myself as Brenna Rhetorical Foil Greene from now on. That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Doesn't it feel so weird? It doesn't feel real that it's Rivalry Week. I'm like, no. Does it feel bizarre to you as well?
It does, and I wrote in the Monday column this week that it feels a little bit like opening Christmas presents on Halloween. Like it's one of those things, or like when you come from like a split family, and if you have two households at Christmas and you're opening Christmas presents, a few days early, and you're like, this isn't Christmas, this isn't right. Why am I doing this? It feels a little bit like that. Never had one of these in September. A lot of things about playing the game in September between Oregon and Oregon State. That's the rivalry we're talking about, in case that wasn't clear. Playing that game in September leads to a lot of other weird things, including the fact that both teams are undefeated for the first time since 1910. Oregon State was Oregon Agricultural College at the time. They did have a tie on their record at the time. They lost to the OAC alumni team in the opener, but they were undefeated, had not lost. I did spend some time this week, Brenna, thinking about how the Beavers and Ducks would play. These teams of Beavers and Ducks would play against, if you could field alumni teams. If there is a version of an alumni team that could beat the current teams, like if you got, I don't know, a few recent graduates, and then maybe there's some positions where you could stick some older dudes. I don't know. Is it possible? It feels impossible in the modern age. Like once you're like, because like you don't have like all NFL guys, like all current NFL guys at all 22 positions anymore. Mm-hmm. So I just feel like that is the ultimate thing from the past that could not ever be recaptured, where a team of alumni, as good as Oregon and Oregon State, but especially Oregon's, output to the NFL has been, I don't think that you could get those guys to line up across from the Ducks and actually win or tie.
I'm so glad you put this amount of thought into this. That's
I started writing these things down. Like okay, so if you have Bo Nix as the quarterback of the alumni team, like who's blocking for him? You could obviously get JPJ. You could get Alex Forsyth. You could play those guys together. Like you start going, like they can be recent alums.
Panay.
But can you get to 22 guys who could like hang with current? Because like theoretically, the NFL guys, the current NFL guys should be better than the current college guys. But are there enough of them? Probably not.
This is a conversation I absolutely expected to be having when we started this podcast. So
when I told you I had no plan for this podcast, I want you to know that I did have in the back of my mind that I was going to dump this one on you to see how you reacted.
I mean, I think that I think an alumni team could beat a team that plays right now, but
especially the Ducks right now. My goodness, they've been terrible.
Yeah, give me your thoughts from the game on Saturday, because you were in attendance. I was not. I was having to manage cutting two games at the same time in my lair at Coin 6, which was not enjoyable. Anyways, continue. How was it?
This is a great pivot out of the alumni game conversation. Good for you.
I nailed it.
So this is the second straight week that I was at it, or I was not at the Oregon game against Idaho, but the second straight week that Oregon played a game that I always thought they were going to win.
Yes.
Like, I never thought they weren't going to pull it out. And then, but there was a moment. There was it was probably only about 3 minutes long, but it was after Boise State went up by 7 before the Whittington kick return. And I think that's when I got out of my chair and went over to our beat writer, James Crepia, who was tensing up a little bit at that moment. And I just started rubbing his shoulders. We all need to relax a little bit here. There's still time to see what's going to happen. Yeah, that's right. James was a little tense in that moment. I mean, like everybody, he thought he was going to be covering a college football playoff team this year, and it was looking pretty perilous. It still is, but plenty of reasons to loosen up. Obviously, Noah Whittington takes it all the way to the almost goal line, and fortunately, that goes Oregon's way. But I would say, I think, to my point from last week that, you play these FCS teams and you like with Idaho, and you shouldn't learn anything about the team because it should be so imbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
With Boise State, I think we also learned more about the Ducks than we should have, but that's a good Boise team. That's a really good Boise State team. And, what I wrote was potentially even a great Boise State team, obviously has an inside track to reach the playoff from the group of 5. That said, you still expect Oregon to win that pretty decidedly, and they didn't. There was no part of statistically or on the field or the eye test or really any phase of the game where you're like, oh, they were dominant and they looked like Oregon should have. Against Idaho, I mean, the stats were like all in Oregon's favor. It was just sort of some like key plays. The Ducks were sloppy. They were unorganized. Thought the play calling was uninspiring at times. Dillon Gabriel was indecisive. But what they did look was really explosive. Like the big plays are there, obviously.
Yeah.
There's no question. I mean, you have so many athletes and so many options. Tez Johnson doesn't catch a ball in that game, I believe. And you still have huge touchdown plays to Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart. Like, you have so many options for Dillon Gabriel that I feel like that was my takeaway was almost like the Ducks are so skilled that they can cover up some of these other issues. The O-line was particularly bad in the first half, and then they're bringing in extra blockers and tight ends, and in the second half, and obviously there were no sacks in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
That said, they still needed 2 special teams touchdowns to win by 3.
Their last 17 points were on special teams.
And maybe you would argue that, hey, if you take away the fumbles, maybe those are scoring drives. The Patrick Herbert fumble, that drive was on its way to a touchdown, and the Ducks were about to slam the door. They were up 7. They were driving. Mm-hmm. They were moving the ball really well. Gabriel was getting the ball out quickly. They were stringing together, positive plays. That was the moment where I was like, oh, this is they're taking this home now. And then you get that Patrick Herbert fumble. Ashton Genty goes 70 yards on the very next play for a touchdown, and all of a sudden it's a whole new ball game. So I find the Ducks' lack of consistency and sort of, I don't want to say like follow through, like just their ability to like finish plays and to sort of deliver. I find that to be concerning. Mm-hmm. But like, I still think they look pretty good for the most part. And so, when we look ahead to the Oregon State game, my presumption is still that Oregon's going to win. I still expect Oregon to erupt at some point. That said, the offensive line issues it wasn't just blocking. You had 2 bad communications between the center and Dillon Gabriel. One of them ends up leading to a fumble, in a really key situation. You're still rotating guys on the offensive line. Obviously haven't found an answer there. Is that going to get better on the road at Research Stadium in a rivalry game? Like, I think that's a really big question, because that feels like, a high bar to cross. So I'm throwing a lot at you here, but mostly I think they survived and advanced. They weren't good enough, but I think they're kind of where they need to be, and it's okay. What did you see cutting 2 games at the same time from your Larritt coin?
I saw it. It feels like you saw everything and you saw nothing at the same time. I don't it's not fun, everyone. It's not fun cutting 2 games at the same time by yourself in a sports department while having to be on air at 10:20 while the games are still going on. Do not recommend, not a good time. But anyways, it feels like you've watched both games, but you've watched nothing. I mean, I think the thing that is the most striking to me is I remember at the start of this year, and I mean, I'm not saying anything anybody else hasn't really said, I feel like, but at the start of this year, when we were at Media Day for Oregon, I talked with a lot of the offensive linemen about the fact that Oregon is kind of like subtly become this offensive lineman powerhouse. And like they've been really good on the line the last few years. And I'm blanking on the name of the award that they've been, the Joe Moore Award. That's it. Yeah. That they've been up for. I could be wrong. Anyways, the offensive line award they've been up for the last few years, like, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it didn't feel like there were as many questions about this offensive line coming into this year as there was last year. There was a lot of questions last year. It felt like there was a lot of unknowns. Whereas this year, it doesn't feel like there was as many unknowns, and yet it's just not gelling in the way that they wanted. And I think, you know, I will totally go and admit this. I think that the Ducks' lack of a obvious candidate at center, I did not take into account as much as I should have as being a problem. And that has been the biggest of the bugaboos.
Totally.
I mean, you got fumbles off of that situation. So, you know, I just wasn't expecting it to be this clunky. So, you know, that, because you can have all the explosive playmakers in the world, but if you can't, if you cannot get a ball off the line of scrimmage, then that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So, you know, there are so many eyes on that group this week in a way where I was not expecting it. I was not expecting that to be the problem this year, if there was a problem. So, and I think a lot of their issues offensively are directly traced back to that group. Because I feel like the running backs have done decently, the wide receivers have done decently, but when you can't give your quarterback enough time, it's just that's the end of it. You know, when you're fumbling on snaps, like, okay, that's a possession gone. So yeah, I'm just really stunned by how uncohesive that group is right now. But I should have thought more about the fact that they really did not have an offensive choice, an obvious choice at center, and now it feels like really, really stark. So that's my number.
So, I mean, I also think that we've been lulled into a sense of security a little bit with this Oregon team because they've won so decisively in, you know, really for years. And I'm trying to look back at the non-conference schedule a little bit. Last year, they struggled at Texas Tech, like they could have lost at Texas Tech, but that was a game that was played in an incredibly hostile environment on the road. I was there. It was blisteringly hot. I mean, that despite the fact that Texas Tech team ended up not being very good, Tyler Shuck ended up getting hurt later in the year. I think that was seen as a good win, you know, like that was a tough game to go actually win. And so there wasn't a lot of hand wringing over that. But like over the years, I mean, outside of the obvious ones, right? Like Oregon doesn't struggle in non-conference games. I mean, Ohio State, obviously a big win, but you know, that was obviously always going to be a close one. You know, when they played Georgia, you know, they played Auburn, you know, 5 years back, you know, like those games are, you know, going to be close. You schedule those games knowing they're going to be close. You know, when you schedule a Boise State, and certainly when you schedule an Idaho, those are games that you're expecting to win comfortably. And maybe that's not giving Boise State enough credit. And this Boise State team does look quite good, and better than where it has been in the past, where, you know, the last few years, you know, Boise State has been more in the good mid-major tier as opposed to, you know, crashing the playoff party tier that, you know, we know them from, you know, in the past decade, in the previous decade. So I think we've been lulled into a sense of security that we just assume Oregon's going to take care of these teams. And that is not always the case, even for good teams. And, you know, I've written about this, but you look around the country, you know, other top 10 teams, top 25 teams are struggling with opponents that on paper don't jump out at you. Alabama was in a fight against South Florida on Saturday until finally in the fourth quarter, they pulled away. You know, Oklahoma struggled with Houston. You know, there's games like that, you know, in the end do no harm, but in the moment you're looking at it like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? Yeah. And so, you know, but when Oregon put the schedule together, there was no part of them that thought we're going to be playing 3 close games. No, like You know, Idaho, Boise State, and Oregon State. Maybe one of those games is tight. Maybe one of those games, you're in a bit of a fight. And I would also say, Brenna, we came into this season. If we had been having a conversation about can Oregon State beat Oregon this season, I was in the camp of absolutely not. No way. That is a preposterous suggestion. And now we're a few days away from the game. It doesn't feel preposterous. I still think the Ducks are going to win. I think they're pretty clearly more talented, but I don't know, the way that Oregon State has been winning does feel like it plays to some of the areas that that Oregon has been struggling. If Oregon State's able to control the time of possession like they have, granted against much worse teams, but if they're able to control the ball for 3/4 of the game, and Oregon's going to punt as much as they have. I mean, Ross James has punted 10 times in 2 games. He punted 27 times all of last year. Like, he's on pace to punt more times by mid-October than he did all of last year, or by the end of September than he did all of last year. So like, this offense just isn't clicking yet. And if you can keep the ball out of their hands and they're going to make mistakes, Oregon State has a real chance.
Yeah, it's crazy. I agree with you. I would have not thought at the beginning of this year that we would be having a legitimate conversation in week 3 about, hey, can Oregon State like really play spoiler in this and have it be a real reality? Now, I will say Oregon State has not played a team that is remarkably at the level of Oregon, or it's just not close. Like, Idaho State is a perennially bad football program. San Diego State has a true freshman starting at quarterback right now.
Bad Big Sky team. Yes.
Yeah, you have a bad Big Sky team and you have a bad Mountain West team. This is not the San Diego State of a few years ago, okay? This is rough. Things have not gone well for the Aztecs in that front. So, I wasn't super surprised by that final score. But I mean, it's at home. This is an Oregon team that obviously has communication issues on the line. You brought that up, is there going to be a play where, there's a communication issue between the quarterback and the center, and all of a sudden, there's another one. We got another fumble. That could really be the difference in this game. So I'm very interested to see how the show goes on the road for the Ducks. I do not think Oregon State is not going to be able to rely just on the offense that they have had the last 2 games in order to win this. They're going to need a little bit more help from their quarterback. We cannot have Trent Walker dropping passes when,
2 games in a row for Trent Walker.
Yeah, that cannot be happening this game. So, those are things to just I'm just looking at, even though I know that Boise State did have a good success in running. Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson are great. They're not going to be Heisman contenders like Genty was. So, Genty is whatever verbiage you want to use there. So, they're going to need all the help they can get. I don't think it's going to be one of those things where it's like, Oregon State could come out and really lay the hammer down on this situation. But I also do think the Beavers have more of a chance than what I thought 2 weeks ago. That's for sure.
I would also say, similarly, I would just say that, the Oregon State offense has kind of found its bread and butter with Hankerson and Griffin.
Yep.
It's bread and butter and jam, if you will. Go ahead, let that one sink in.
I'm just.
But like a lot of,
it's slow.
But a lot of Boise State's success on the ground wasn't just, Genty wearing down Oregon, and he really, like, a lot of it was him making really special plays too. Like, that 70-yard run, he's making a move that like very few running backs are making. He had a touchdown, where he ran the middle and everybody collapsed and everybody bought that he was running up the middle, and he just danced to the outside and scores. Not every running back can do that. Very few running backs are as skilled as he was. So I think maybe it's a little bit of a red herring to say, because Boise State ran the ball against Oregon's defense, that Oregon State's going to be able to have the same success even with 2 really good backs in Griffin and Hankerson. I think it's going to be harder for them on the ground than it was for Genty, just because even though there's 2 of them, he's in a different tier. But I think obviously the Beavers need to have success on the ground to have any chance. Trent Walker, obviously a go-to receiver from what we've seen, especially against San Diego State. And, we haven't seen Darius Clemens yet for
I was
Oregon
just going
State.
to say that.
And I don't want to get conspiratorial and suggest that Oregon State has been holding anything back. I'm sure, like, play calling wise, they've held some things back. But Darius Clemens, supposedly has been close the last 2 weeks to playing. If he plays against Oregon, there's no tape. You don't have.
There really isn't much tape.
It's hard. It's going to be hard to game plan for him or to know exactly how Ryan Gunderson would want to use him. And so if he's out there on Saturday, granted, it will be his Oregon State debut, and there's, hasn't played in, a year, all that. But that he could be a difference maker if he does play in that game. And Trent Walker is still obviously a go-to receiver for Giovanni McCoy. And then you add Darius Clemens, you have the tight ends, and you have the ground game. It feels like there's potential for Oregon State to have some success with mixing up the offense. But again, all this comes back to if Oregon is better in the areas they struggled the first 2 weeks, if they are able to protect Giovanni McCoy better, if they can clean up the communication issues, and if they don't turn the ball over, Oregon should probably win pretty decisively. Almost regardless of what Oregon State does offensively.
Do you know what the line is for the game? I have no idea.
It's 14. It was basically been 21 all summer. Mm-hmm. And now that we've seen, Oregon twice and Oregon State twice, the line's come down to 14, which is a pretty big drop, especially considering both teams are still 2-0. I don't know if I'm as impressed with Oregon State's win at San Diego State as some have been. I think it is impressive to win any game in a shutout. I think it's impressive to win any game in a shutout on the road. That is extremely difficult. Oregon State, think about all the good defenses Oregon State has had, all the good teams Oregon State has had over the years. They haven't had a road shutout since the 83 Oregon game when they won, 0-0 tie in the toilet bowl. So it is a rare feat.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is.
But I'm with you that San Diego State's not any good.
Yeah, they're not any good. And it also took until, it was 7-0 until the start of the fourth quarter. So that's, it's not like it was 21-0 after the half and everyone just cruised. No, this thing was, and by the way, it should have been 7-7. But San Diego State decided to fumble on their goal line.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but also you had the Trent Walker drop, which would have been a touchdown. So, there's, you can play that both ways, but I agree with you. For Oregon State to have been truly impressive in that game, I would have liked it to have been 42-0 and 21-0 at half, where it's, but again, this has not yet been a super explosive offense. No. It's been really effective. The ground games are really, but they're going to grind you down. Absolutely. And so if that's the MO and you can have success against Oregon, again, there's a real chance, but they just haven't seen a front seven and they won't see a front seven like they'll see against Oregon all year. This is obviously the best team on their schedule. Boise State has a case, but comes up 3 points short.
So do you have a score prediction?
Ooh, gosh, I've been putting this off all week. I need to send one in for the paper this week. So I guess this is the place to do it.
I haven't really thought about it either. So this is good.
I think Oregon's going to win by a touchdown. I think it's going to be something like 28-21. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay. I think Oregon State covers. I think it's close. I think Reser Stadium gives Oregon State a real advantage.
It does.
I think Oregon State's going to have success moving the ball, but not quite as much success as they've had. I think Oregon's going to have some issues, but not as many issues as they've had. And those two things sort of combine to give the Ducks a touchdown margin in this.
Okay. All right. I'm along
Where
similar lines with
if you
you.
had to think if you're on the spot, I'm not going to hold you to this. If
No,
you change it, okay, okay.
no. I've been thinking as you've been talking. I've been multitasking, listening to you, and also processing what I think in my mind. And it's similar, but a little bit different, I guess. I'm gonna go 35-24.
Okay.
Yeah, 35-24.
Not picking the upset, huh?
No, no. God, but I kind of want to.
I know.
Oh,
It's tempting because
tempting.
the Beavers are great at home. The Beavers are great at home. The Ducks have not earned it, frankly. I think the burden of proof is much more on Oregon at this point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't know. I'm kind of in the fool me once, fool me twice. Now I'm potentially letting you fool me 3 times because I've picked the Ducks to, win pretty decisively each of the first 2 weeks. Obviously, Idaho, I think I said like 72-10. I think I said 55-45 against Boise State, but I keep waiting for the Ducks to have that explosion. And if it doesn't come this week, it's like George Bush said, you're not going to fool me again.
Yeah.
By the 4th or 5th time, I'm gonna trust you that the offense isn't all that in the way that we thought it was going to be. And what I wrote after the Boise State game, Brenna, and you can weigh in on this, but this is going to catch up to Oregon at some point if they don't get these issues sorted out quickly. And it's not going to be in the games that we've all been circling. It's not going to be Ohio State or even Michigan or Wisconsin. It's going to be like Maryland. It'll be Michigan State on a Friday night. It's going to be at Purdue. It's going to be it's going to catch up to them at a really inopportune time. Because if you're good enough to beat all these teams, but you still only lose to Ohio State, okay, you're still in pretty good shape. You're in great shape. But they are playing poorly enough where they could lose to a lot of teams that are still on their schedule.
If they do not figure out some things, that offensive line is going to get absolutely decimated at some point. Decimated.
One thing I do want to just be on the record is acknowledging Oregon State's offensive line has been very good. They do have an injury of their own. Their own right guard, Tyler Volton, announced last night that he's going to miss the season. He went down with a pretty gruesome looking injury in San Diego, so that's not necessarily a surprise, but he's out. So, the Beavers are onto their number 2. Nick Daschle tells me that guy's pretty good. So, the Beavers are hoping there's not a significant drop off, but I mean, it has to matter when you lose a starter on the offensive line. And so the Beavers will be making an adjustment there this week as well. So it's not just the Ducks that have questions on the O-line this week.
Yeah, I just, there's one that's obviously just way more underscored than the other. Let's put it that way.
Well, sure, because we've seen it be bad for 2 weeks in a row. So, no question.
It's crazy to see at the very least. I was obviously was not expecting it when I'm going around asking a media day, hey, you guys have become like a kind of silent offensive lineman powerhouse. Well, never mind.
Power's off.
Power's off.
Power outage.
Oh, Lord.
Brenna, I do want to. We talked about kind of the oddity of this game being in September and it now being a non-conference game, which is something obviously, not in our lifetimes. Do you have an outlook on the future of this rivalry? It's only scheduled through next season. Obviously, both sides have said that they want to continue the series. Oregon has games scheduled in 26, 27, 28. They showed a willingness to invest and make moves for these 2 years. In your gut, how confident are you that this is going to continue as an uninterrupted rivalry?
Very confident. Just the fan bases. This state would riot if it didn't happen. People would. I mean, Oregon fans would be upset. Oregon State fans. I mean, obviously there are fans within both fan bases who would be like, "Good on them. Mm-hmm. Don't want to play this game anyways. screw them. But I think the vast majority of fans in both fan bases would be very upset. And this already has been a transition. I think that even if you're an Oregon fan, like, yes, you understood the necessity of it, but it doesn't mean that it was the transition that you wanted, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the last slice of what we had before, and I would be really surprised if it didn't happen. I think it's good for both programs, and I think that it's something that it would be a real shame if it wasn't around. It would be a real shame. So there are other schools around the country that have shown that this is possible. Colorado State, Iowa State, where they just keep playing this game. And I think that they've got to make it work. They've got to make it work. This is the money doesn't matter. Like, make it happen. I don't know. What do you think it's going to be? It's going to be the end?
I don't know. I'm not as confident as you are. I agree with everything you're saying about the spirit of the rivalry and the desire to keep it going. I think all of that is completely spot on. Where I do have some questions is in those 3 years, the 26, 27, 28, where Oregon has the schedule locked in. It costs a certain amount of money to move these games around. They had to find a new opponent for Texas Tech. They had to buy out a game with Boise State. San Diego State was supposed to be playing Washington. Like, it was a whole thing, and there's money going out. And the finances of these college athletic departments are just getting tighter. You're going to have, the House settlement, all these departments are preparing for $22 million in added costs starting next year. Can you find the $22 million plus $2 million more a year to make the moves to get Oregon State on the schedule? Like, that's sofa coins compared to some of these other numbers that get thrown around, but it's real money within those athletic departments. And I just think that there is sort of a sliding scales sort of decision for Oregon. Is it worth it to them to play the game at any cost? Oregon State's going to have some of these same financial questions. Is Oregon willing to do it at any cost? Or is there a point where they say, we can't do it for these few years? And then if you don't do it for 3 years, does that become okay and become the standard?
Yeah.
And I think that there would be a real appetite to get it back on the schedule for both teams, but I think it also then kind of depends on where everybody is. Like, where's Oregon State playing by 2029? How's life been in the Big Ten for Oregon by 2029? I think so. I have questions, and we're just not, we just don't. They obviously haven't addressed it yet. They haven't gotten it on the schedule. I don't think it's their biggest priority, frankly. Maybe scheduling wise, it is a priority, but I don't think it's the biggest priority with everything else that's happening across college sports. Mm-hmm. And I do wonder if it's something that gets lost in the. I fear that it'll get lost sort of in all of that, at least for a period of time. And it would just be a shame, frankly, to lose any time in this rivalry, because it has been uninterrupted for so many years. That to lose that would be crushing. That said, Utah and BYU went a couple of years without playing. When Utah made the jump to the Pac-12, they went a few years without playing, not so in the last several years. And now here they are back in the same conference, and it's back to where it was at the end of the year as the annual rivalry game. So I hope something similar happens with Oregon and Oregon State, where it kind of all works out in the end. But right now, I definitely have some questions about the at least medium-term future of the rivalry. Like, will this game be in Corvallis again in 2 years? I mean, that's a year where Oregon's schedule is locked up. They have Portland State, Boise State, and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is going to be hard to buy out. You've already bought out a Boise game and already moved Boise around. And then you have Portland State, which, you want the FCS game there if you're playing Boise State and Oklahoma State. You don't want to have Oregon State, Boise State, and Oklahoma State. So then I start worrying a little bit about, if that year could possibly happen. That would be the Oregon State home game year. I don't know. I think it's something to chew on as we get into this game with only one left on the calendar. But like, I also don't want to be a total doomsdayer about it. I mean, last year I was sitting here saying, "Oh well, there's no game on the calendar beyond this year. You know, I'll believe it when I see it." And they followed through and they made it happen for these 2 years. So my very strong hope, like yours, is that, you know, the next step is 26, 27, 28, 29, and we continue the annual tradition here in the state.
We shall see.
I have another point on this.
Oh yes, please, please.
Related to the lack of a name for the rivalry, which is a topic we tend to circle back to once a year. And there are certainly different ways of looking at this. There are a good number of people who just have decided they're going to go with the original name that we have all used for most of our lives. You know, we don't use it at the Oregonian. You know, the schools don't use it, but a lot of fans do.
Yeah.
My theory on this is because the schools have not made any effort to come up with a name. And like anything else, if it was a priority, it would be done. Oregon has access to the best branding in the entire universe. If it was important to Oregon to have a name for the rivalry, it would have a name. But why would Oregon not make it a priority? Now, the college football landscape or college sports has completely changed since they changed the name, since they got rid of the name in 2020. Like, you know, when you talk about realignment, NIL, transfer, you know, now the House settlement, everything is changing. Like, things like the name maybe should be a lower priority, but we're losing the identity of the rivalry, like what it actually means, because it doesn't happen at the end of the year anymore. So it doesn't mean what it did on the field. You know, the schools are not on the same level anymore. So it's losing that piece of its identity. And then when you don't have a name to sort of rally behind that connects everybody, it's losing that piece of its identity too. Yeah. So it feels like one of those things. It makes it feel less essential once it starts losing its identity. And once something starts to feel a little less essential, it becomes easier to let it go. And so then that ties it back to my previous point about, like, maybe Oregon doesn't really want to do this at any cost. Like, if you're suddenly coming out and be like, hey, we're going to call this game the Wrath of Grapes or the Pinot War. I've got lots of names, as you know, the big football game being my favorite. But like, if you say, hey, we're going to call it the Bigfoot ball game, everybody rally behind the Bigfoot ball game, but oh, by the way, we're not going to play it for the next 3 years, that doesn't work as well as, we're not going to play the Oregon State rivalry series in football for the next 3 years. Well, maybe people are already a little detached from it. So, I don't know.
That feels a little conspiratorial to me, but all right, okay.
I live in America in 2024. I've earned it.
You've earned it. You have earned it. If that's your one conspiracy in this lovely day and age, I guess you're right. It's all good.
I just don't know if you want to be building enthusiasm and building up the rivalry with Oregon State if you're not totally sure you're going to be able to deliver it every year.
I mean,
what'd you say?
They're never going to name it. Like, I mean, at this point, I don't even think it doesn't have anything to do with building up, blah, blah, blah. If they were going to name it, they would have named it in the first year of them saying we are not calling it that anymore.
Yeah.
And so now it's never going to be named, and that's why everybody's just gone back to what it was.
Which defeats the purpose of changing the name in the first place, because you did not get through to your core audience about the point.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Brenna, you were on the road last weekend. I'm gonna make a little pivot here before I get too far into my before I get my my aluminum hat on, my tinfoil hat on. You were on the road with Brenna Greene. You were in Seattle for a different football game. You saw Bo Nix make his NFL debut as a starting quarterback, at least in the regular season. Not a sparkling debut for Bo.
No.
But I'm curious what you learned being there, talking to Bo, seeing the Broncos up close. What was that like?
Well, two things. I was actually very surprised that he wasn't as harsh on himself post-game as I kind of expected him to be, because normally, like, when it's a bad performance and it's a loss, Bo has no problem criticizing himself. And that wasn't really the tone that was given by him. He was like, he felt it I've never seen him give a moral victory press conference before, but that's kind of how it felt, which I'm fine with. Whatever. It's your first NFL start. I'm all right with that. It wasn't his best performance, to say the least. He should have been intercepted 3 times. He was intercepted twice. He should have been intercepted 3 times. And there was, it was, you had 2 drives where you were within the opponent's 15-yard line after turnovers by them, and they got 6 points out of those drives instead of 14, which, is the difference in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of surprised by him not being as harsh as I thought he was going to be. The other thing that was surprising, and maybe this was just because of how the questions were asked, he did not feel at all sentimental about, hey, this is your first NFL game. This is what you've been dreaming of for your whole life. He was asked multiple times about his emotions of that day, and we went full analytical. Like, not a single moment of like I tried to get in there. They kind of ended the press conference early, I thought, for Bo. I tried to get in there and be like, hey, this is something you've been dreaming of since you were a little kid. Like, was there any moment today where it was like, whoa, this is actually like legit happening?
Mm-hmm.
But the way that it was asked was like, what were your emotions of the day? And he just nothing. And then it was like, and then the person clarified and was like, I meant like, the emotions of like getting your first, like the emotional side of it, not like take me through the day, like blank, 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 And Bo still reverted right back to the other thing. And then they're like, so did you have any nerves? And he was like, no. Which I was like, this is not the Bo Nix that I've interviewed before, so this is very interesting. So that was interesting. It was a press conference that I was like, okay, like this is different. This is not the Bo that I interviewed. So that was like one of my biggest takeaways from the game. Actually, was kind of how the end of the game press conference went, because I was like, oh man, he's gotten. I don't know what kind of media coaching he's gotten, but boy, has he gotten it. So that was just, I guess, interesting from a journalism standpoint. Watching him out there, like, but it was also not him who it wasn't just him who, he felt okay about his performance. I mean, so did Sean Payton. Sean Payton straight up told us that he went over to his wide receivers and basically said, stop dropping the dang thing. Like, give our quarterback a chance. What is wrong with you all? Like, that was like the tone. So, he said that the issues that they had were not at quarterback that day, that it was all the other position groups that needed to step up, and that, Bo should not hang his head about his performance because there were a lot of other issues that need to be addressed before Bo. So, I think that if Sean Payton wasn't necessarily happy with Bo, I don't think he would come out and be like, oh, Bo was awful, but I definitely don't think he would be saying anything like that.
Right.
So, sorry
I didn't cut you off there. I was just going to say, like, it's just different in the NFL where, I mean, the games matter, obviously, and the performance matters. But, if we're being honest, like, Bo has a really long runway in Denver. One loss at Oregon, like the games you're talking about where he was really hard on himself.
Yep.
First game at Oregon, he loses to Georgia. Oregon State, he blows a 21-point lead. His defense blows a 21-point lead. Two games to Washington, 3 games to Washington, and that's it. And those games were all hugely consequential. And in college, there's just this, like, your season hinges on this game. Your entire year hinges on this game. And in the NFL, it doesn't, but like, players are competitive. So like, I totally understand your point, because like you would expect to see kind of that same stuff from Bo, but like, it feels healthier to be able to see the bigger picture and be able to say, like, this is the beginning. And he's a rookie quarterback making his first start on the road in a really tough environment against a good team. Like, I'm like, okay, like, that doesn't have to be that doesn't have to be the weight of the world on your shoulders in the way, the last time you were in Seattle, for example, was.
I had some people who were not happy that I did bring up in my post-game report, and I made sure to clarify this as much as I could. I said, this does not have any correlation. There's nothing that is, I'm not trying to make some sort of grand statement here, but Bo Nix is 0-4 against teams from Seattle, which is kind of weird. I bet he's not 0-4 against any other teams from one place, at all ever. So, whatever. It's just more of a random factoid than anything. It has no bearing on things.
I'm sure that people in Seattle who identify with both those teams are very aware of that fact.
Yes. Yeah. I had somebody who told me I should get my press pass revoked on Twitter for saying that post game. That I should not be allowed into the locker room. Bo should not allow me into the locker room. All right. So, yeah, you're right about the fact that it probably is. It's much healthier for him to have this stance right now, and for him to be able to see the big picture. And to be honest with you, I mean, you look at other rookie quarterbacks around the league. Okay, I'm gonna be frank. I did not watch a single other second of NFL football on Sunday because, holy smokes, a time was had in Seattle trying to get into the game. But anyway, so I did not have any time to watch any other games. But from what I've heard, I mean, doesn't seem like any other rookie quarterback had a better performance than him. I mean, Caleb Williams was out of control from what I've been told. I don't think Jaden Daniels. So, I mean, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, but I don't think anybody else who was a rookie was necessarily had a stellar day either. And it seems like Bo might have had actually the best day of all of them.
Yeah, you start a rookie quarterback knowing that there's going to be growing pains, and that's kind of part of the process that teams have accepted by not making quarterbacks sit the way that they did 10 years ago and for all of time. It's like we're going to start you from day one. There's going to be a learning curve here that is different. But yeah, it's cool that you were up there and got to check in on him. It was neat. One just small note from Eugene was, and not surprisingly, but Bo's family was at the game at Autzen. And when Tez came off the field, first people he saw were Pat and Krista Nix, Bo's sister, and Bo's wife Izzy were all there to greet Tez. And that was a pretty cool scene on top of everything else on Saturday night at Autzen. So thought that was neat that they crammed that into the weekend before the start of,
And by the way, props to Oregon for letting Tez go to Seattle and see Bo's start as well, because they could have very easily said, no, you're not going up there. You have to. Yeah, he had
things to do on Sunday too. So yes, was glad that worked out for the whole family. Okay, Brenna, it's rivalry week.
Okay, we reconvene.
We will come back in non-rivalry week. I mean, it's going to be a lot quieter around here next week, at least on the football front, because Oregon's going to have a bye, either be licking their wounds from a tough loss or still doing an overall sort of autopsy on these first three games before the start of the Big Ten schedule. Speaking of the Big Ten schedule, Oregon State has Purdue next week at Reser. Kind of a big stretch of games here for the Beavers. And, hopefully some other stuff going on too. So look forward to talking to you about all that. I'm sure we're going to do a big old, I already said autopsy, but we're going to do a big old rehash on what happens on Saturday in Corvallis. I will see you there. And we will talk next week. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. Continue to read our coverage at OregonLive and watch Brenna on Coin 6.